Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Tumarkin with Breaking Forward Coaching, and I wanted to welcome all of our viewers for our coaching conversation with Adam Mycyk, who is here today joining us from Poland. And I really wanted to express my appreciation to you, sir, for joining us, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights with the audience.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. Sure. Where to begin? Yeah, so I spent a good amount of time in Washington, D.C. Before I made the big jump across the pond in the mid 90s. And so in D.C. I went, to undergrad and law school in D.C. and I spent a couple of years working there in a small law firm after I finished law school. And this was right around the time when the Soviet Union fell apart and all these former Soviet republics became independent. Now, my undergrad degree, I was an international relations major with a focus on Soviet and East European studies. So it just tells you how old I am. Yeah. Soviet Union was still around, right? And I had a minor in Russian language and literature, right? So, kind of this part of the world, sort of would have made sense for me, right? But what I was doing, after law school had absolutely nothing to do with, international relations, this part of the world. It was a very like focused, domestic focused regulatory practice or whatever. And to be honest, Washington, D.C. was kind of boring after living there for about 10 years, right? So, I was kind of like thinking, okay, what's next for me? What's next for me? And it also just happens that my parents are both Ukrainian immigrants. So they immigrated to the United States after World War II. They fled Ukraine, during the war, when the Soviets were heading towards Poland, actually where I am today. And, and they ended up in sort of displaced persons camps in Germany for a long time. So they were war refugees, basically, right? And then immigrated to the States in the 50s. And, I was born in 1966. Yeah. So, very long time ago. Anyway, so I had all these things that in my background that kind of made me pretty well suited, for this region. I mean, I grew up speaking Ukrainian at home. I, studied Russian intensely for 4 years, at university. But I was, kind of sitting in DC doing nothing. And then one day, this former boyfriend of mine who had been together with for like 4 years, it was like a pretty, long relationship or whatever. He calls me up and he's like, "Oh, did you see this ad in the Legal Times, which was like the Washington, D.C. newspaper for, the legal profession? And they had like help wanted ads in the back." He's like, "Did you see this ad?" I'm like, "Which ad?" And he's like, "Oh, there's a law firm that's looking for a lawyer of, your level of experience who, speaks Russian and or Ukrainian to like join them in their newly opened Kiev office." And he's like, "This sounds like it's perfect for you, right?" And I thought to myself, like, oh my God, did I hurt you so badly that you hate me so much you want to send me halfway across the world or whatever? Yeah. Right. I'm like, why are you thinking that this job is perfect for me? Yeah. Um,
It
because
sounds
here
like
I
it
was
was perfect for
well,
you.
yeah, I mean it was, right? But here I'm thinking, oh, I have this like, wonderful like yuppie life in, DC or whatever, and you want to send me like to breadlines in the Soviet Union or whatever, or former Soviet Union, right? Um, that there was, it intrigued me and I was thinking about it. And then finally I was like, you know what the hell? Yeah. I was, 27 years old and, I'd never left the United States. I didn't even have a passport, right? Probably like a lot of Americans. Yeah. And I just figured, if I'm ever going to have an adventure in my life, like this age, this time, this is now the time to do it, right? And to get to see a part of the world that actually is a part of me, right? And my heritage and, all that stuff. And so I was like, yeah, what the hell? So I, sent in my resume and next thing you know, I'm hired and a month and a half later, I'm packing up and, moving to Ukraine or whatever. So that's how I ended up in Ukraine. And basically I was there, for 28 years up until, the war started. And now it's, we're just hit the 2 year anniversary mark, for that, right? But it's sort of like I've come full circle in the sense that my father left Ukraine when he was 9 years old or something in 1943, heading towards, Western Europe or whatever to escape, mean Russians coming their way, right? And, I ended up having to do the same thing, 28 years or 70 some years later or whatever, almost 80 years later. So yeah, it's kind of bittersweet how these things, you know, play out or whatever, right? But who would have thought, right? Who would have thought that 80 years later this same thing would be happening, right? Anyway, so yeah, so when we were leaving, well, part of the reason that we didn't leave sooner before the war started was because we didn't have the necessary paperwork to enable us to take the cat out into Europe, right? And it was going to take, I don't know, like 3 months or something, to get the paperwork done. We had found a way to try and get it sooner, but then, the day the woman was supposed to come and we were supposed to meet with the vet who was going to help us, with the paperwork and give it to us. That's the day the war started. Yeah. So we're just like, oh, great. Um, but the good story is that when we finally got to the border, with the cat, at that point, luckily Poland was just letting everybody in with whatever animals they were bringing, and you didn't need any paperwork. And they chipped her as soon as we crossed the border, and just kind of checked her out that she was okay. And then I was able to shortly after arriving in Poland to get her an actual European pet passport. Yeah, so now she probably is able to go to more countries around the world than I am able to go to with her European pet passport. Yeah.
So
So yeah,
yeah,
so anyway, so that's how I ended up there. And then, with Dentons, I mean, it's Dentons was kind of a journey too. I mean, I probably before joining Dentons about 10 years ago, I think I'd been with three other law firms on the way, all, international, kind of law firms, various sizes or whatever. But the decision to stay in Ukraine, I mean, it was sort of, initially I thought I would go there just for 3 years, and then, I ended up kind of falling in love with the place, and I met my husband. We've been together as a couple for 20, just over 25 years now, and we've been married for just over 10. So that was another reason I stayed.